Have you ever met someone who doesn't react, doesn't chase, and yet without saying much seems to shift the energy in the room just by being there? They don't raise their voice. They don't rush to prove their point. They're not constantly posting, calling, checking in, but somehow people notice when they enter and feel the absence when they leave. At first glance, they're often misunderstood. You'll hear people whisper, "She's so distant. He's cold, arrogant, hard to read." But here's what most people miss. That silence, that calm, that unshakable vibe, it's not coldness. It's emotional intelligence in its rarest, rawest form. Let me tell you about Maya. In a high-pressure corporate office full of high-volume talkers and emotional outbursts, Maya stood out, not because she was the loudest, but because she wasn't. When things went wrong, she didn't panic. When others gossiped, she stayed silent. She didn't entertain drama, didn't chase after validation, and didn't respond to every message with urgency. So naturally, people called her cold, until the day the team hit a crisis and suddenly everyone turned to Maya. Not because she had all the answers, but because she had what no one else did: inner control. This video is about people like Maya. It's about how emotional intelligence, real, grounded, embodied emotional intelligence, is often mistaken for indifference, when in fact it's the highest form of power in a world obsessed with noise. Because sometimes, the quietest person in the room isn't out of words. They're just done wasting them. From the moment we're young, we're taught that being nice means being available. Answer the phone, respond to the message, say yes even when you want to scream no. Don't be rude, don't disappoint. Be there, always. But here's the truth, no one told you. Constant availability doesn't make you kind, it makes you vulnerable. You begin to mistake your self-worth for how fast you reply. You start equating love with how much of yourself you give away. And before you know it, you're not a person anymore. You're a service. People don't ask how you are. They ask what you can do for them. And because you've trained them to expect a version of you who is always on, they come to feel entitled to your energy. You become the emergency contact for everyone's emotional chaos. But here's the cruel irony. The more available you are, the less valued you become. Because what's always there? What's always easy to access? Eventually, it's seen as background noise, disposable, forgettable. And yet, the minute you stop responding, the silence, it's deafening. They notice, they panic, they label you cold, changed, distant. But what they're really feeling isn't anger, it's withdrawal. You were their emotional supply, and now you're not refilling the cup. This isn't about becoming heartless. This is about reclaiming something sacred, your emotional bandwidth. Because availability without boundaries isn't generosity, it's self-abandonment dressed up as virtue. Let's get something clear. Emotional intelligence isn't about not feeling. It's about knowing exactly what you're feeling and choosing not to be ruled by it. But that's not what most people think. They see someone who doesn't explode when provoked, someone who doesn't chase after every insult, every whisper, every passive-aggressive jab, and they assume they must not care. But what if they care so deeply about their peace, their time, their energy, that they refuse to waste it on people who don't? That's the difference. Reactivity is reflex. It's the knee-jerk reply to every criticism, every text, every guilt trip. It's jumping into the drama just to prove you're right and feeling drained the second after. Emotional intelligence is response. It's the breath before the reply. It's the pause that says, "Is this worth my energy?" And often, the answer is no. You see, not everything deserves a reaction, not every question needs an answer, and not every battle is yours to fight, even when your ego really wants to jump in. Carl Jung spoke about psychic energy, this invisible currency you're spending all the time. Every argument you dive into, every apology you offer when it's not needed, every time you explain yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you, that's energy, your energy, leaking out into places that give you nothing back. And when that energy runs low, do you know what happens? You stop thinking clearly. You start overgiving. You become easy to manipulate, not because you're weak, but because you're tired. And tired people don't draw boundaries. They break them just to keep the peace. But here's the secret no one teaches. Real power isn't in reacting. It's in knowing when not to. Because not every fire is yours to put out. And sometimes the strongest move you'll ever make is stillness. Let's talk about a word that makes people uncomfortable. Boundaries. Some hear it and immediately think of rejection, coldness, distance. They think, if you really cared, you'd always be there. But here's the truth they don't want to admit. Boundaries are not walls, they're doors. And doors don't exist to lock everyone out. They exist so you can choose who gets in and who doesn't. Without boundaries, you become a hallway. Everyone walks through. No one stops to ask permission. They drop their problems on your floor. They yell their frustrations in your ears. And then they leave, lighter, while you're left carrying what they couldn't hold. Sound familiar? You were taught that love means saying yes, that care means always answering, that kindness means never turning someone away. But real love, real self-respect, real maturity, they all require limits. Because without limits, your soul gets looted. The truth is, people will test your boundaries, especially the ones who are benefiting from you not having any. When you stop replying right away, they call you distant. When you say, I can't right now, they say you've changed. When you stop playing therapist, rescuer, emotional sponge, they say you're being selfish. But what they're really saying is, you're not convenient for me anymore. And that's exactly the point. Boundaries aren't about pushing people away. They're about protecting the parts of you that have been overexposed, overused, and undervalued. Think about this. When someone respects your boundary, it tells you everything about their character. When someone fights it, manipulates, guilts, shames you for setting it, that tells you even more. People who love you won't be offended by your peace. So the next time someone says you become cold, smile gently. Because chances are, you're just finally warm to yourself. Let's be honest. We live in a world addicted to noise. Speak faster, post more, defend yourself, react. Now, but here's a truth few are ready to face. Silence isn't weakness. Silence is mastery. Not the silence of submission, not the silence of fear, but the silence that comes from clarity, from knowing you don't owe everyone a response. This kind of silence, it's dangerous because it's powerful. You see, when you respond, you're still part of the game. You're still feeding the cycle, explaining, justifying, apologizing, pleading to be understood. But when you choose silence, real silence, not from anger but from strength, something strange happens. The rules change. Suddenly, people don't know how to engage with you. They can't bait you. They can't provoke you. They can't pull strings they no longer have access to. And that's when the panic sets in. The silence doesn't hurt them because you disappeared. It hurts because they lost control of the narrative. When you go quiet, you take their script away. The role they cast you in, the one where you always respond, always explain, always fix, vanishes. And now, they're forced to look at themselves. But that's not your job anymore. Carl Jung said, individuation requires distance. You cannot become who you truly are while constantly reacting to the expectations and noise of others. Silence is where you reclaim your identity, where you stop performing, where you begin to hear yourself again. And yes, it will be misunderstood. People will call it rude, cold, passive-aggressive. But those are the words of those who only ever valued you for your noise, not your presence. Because silence reveals what words often conceal. And for many, that revelation is terrifying. But for you, it's liberating. Real power doesn't announce itself. It arrives silently. There's something you need to understand, something they don't want you to realize. Your energy is your currency, and you've been spending it like it's endless, on people, conversations, obligations, and chaos that give you nothing in return. It's time to take it back. You don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to be liked by everyone. You don't need to be available to prove your worth. What you do need is to make peace with one uncomfortable truth. Choosing yourself will cost you people, but not the right ones. The right ones will adjust to your boundaries. The wrong ones will resent you for setting them. And this is where the real shift happens. When you stop reacting, you start seeing. You begin to notice who only came around when you were too tired to say no, who depended on your chaos to soothe their own, who called it love when it was really just convenience. You realize that not everyone who misses you. They miss your accessibility. They miss how easy it was to get your time, your attention, your emotional labor. But now, you're not handing it out like samples in a grocery store. You've upgraded. You're no longer responding out of guilt. You're not explaining every decision. You're not picking up the phone just because it rings, because you've learned something essential, something revolutionary. Self-respect begins where over-explaining ends. You've realized that you are allowed to protect your energy. You're allowed to say, not today. You're allowed to disappear for a while, not to escape, but to realign. You're not ghosting people. You're unhaunting yourself. This isn't arrogance. This isn't cruelty. This is emotional clarity. And it's the beginning of a life where your peace isn't a negotiation. So if you've ever been told you've changed, say thank you, because you're not just reclaiming your energy. You're reclaiming you. Here's the part no one warns you about. When you choose yourself, you'll be alone. Not forever, but at first. And it will feel like loss, like walking away from a crowd only to hear your own footsteps echo. But that silence, that solitude, it's not emptiness, it's clarity. Because the loneliness of the strong isn't about having no one around. It's about finally realizing how many were around you only because you had no boundaries. You'll grieve the version of you that kept the peace by breaking yourself. You'll miss the comfort of being needed, even if being needed left you exhausted. You'll feel misunderstood, distant, maybe even selfish. But here's what's really happening. You're not falling apart. You're falling inward. You're shedding the layers that were never really you. The people pleaser, the over-explainer, the emotional safety net for everyone else. And in that sacred solitude, something else begins to grow. Wholeness. You start making decisions from your intuition, not from fear. You start listening to your inner voice, not the noise of expectations. And you begin to understand what Carl Jung meant when he said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. You become calm in rooms that used to shake you. You become unmoved by people who once controlled you. And you begin to feel something you haven't felt in years, yourself. You're not heartless. You're healing. You're not detached. You're disciplined. You're not cold. You're clear. And no, not everyone will understand your transformation. But that's okay. You didn't come here to be understood. You came here to be free. If this message found you at the right time, if something in you whispered yes while you listened, then don't let it fade. Act on it, because awareness is only the first step. Transformation begins with choice. The choice to stop being the version of you everyone else expects and start becoming the one you were always meant to be. So here's what I want you to do. Drop a comment below, not for me, but for you. And write, I choose my peace. Let it be your first boundary, your quiet declaration, your moment of emotional sovereignty. And if this spoke to your soul, if it reminded you that stillness is strength and silence is power, give this video a like. Not for the algorithm, but because your energy deserves more of this. And if you're ready for the next step in reclaiming your power, subscribe and hit that bell. Because what's coming next? It's for those who are done being emotionally available to the wrong people and ready to become deeply connected to themselves. This is your season of clarity, your time to protect what's sacred, your permission to be unavailable and unforgettable. I'll see you in the next one.